Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you're here and that you're joining us on this webinar about learning differences in the junior year crunch. While everyone's getting in, you will see that there's a welcome poll that'll just give us a little bit of information about you. And so if you want to fill that out, we're going to jump right in about 1 minute. And also, while we're just, logistically getting going, like most webinars, you will have the ability to ask questions. There's a Q&A, so if you have questions, feel free to put those in there, and that'll help us. We are going to answer questions at the end because we're going to be covering probably a lot of things that you might actually have questions about. So with that in mind, we've got a lot to cover tonight. So I think we'll go ahead and get started because I know I'm really excited about this webinar. This is a near and dear topic to my heart. I'm Lisa Carlton, and I am the founder of College MatchPoint, which is now ESM College MatchPoint, and I'm a senior college consultant. And I have been working with students with learning differences through the college process for the last 20 years. And I think it's my favorite part of my job. So to join such wonderful colleagues tonight and be able to hopefully provide some information we're super excited. And what a fantastic panel we have tonight. We have Elizabeth Hamblet with us, a nationally recognized expert in learning differences. She's a speaker and an author. And if you see behind her little thing, you can see her book right there. And we're thrilled to have Elizabeth. We also have Jed Applerouth with us, an educational psychologist, a test prep expert, and the founder of Applerouth Education. And we have Jenna Burke with us, an executive function coach and an elite tutor with Applerouth Education. And finally, we have Drew Halprin with us who's an academic success and testing expert from Summit. And all of these people are, working with students with learning differences is near and dear to their hearts. And so we're excited to have this time with you all. And I am going to stop sharing here so that you can see us. We're going to have a panel discussion, really. And so really the first question I want to start with, Jed, is for you, okay? And that question is, well, before I do that, I want to talk just a little bit about why this is important. Why are we here tonight? Because we know that junior year is probably, for most students, one of the most challenging years you're going to have in high school, right? And with students with learning differences, the stakes are even higher because they have standardized testing. They're trying to get their accommodations. They're starting to think about what kind of transition to college is going to work for them. So all of those things make the combination of having those learning differences and just getting through the junior year can be a little challenging. And so our goal tonight is to really provide you with practical strategies to help your student be independent, have confidence, and ultimately to be ready for life after high school. And for many kids, that will be college. So that's kind of setting the stage why we chose junior year as the piece to focus on. And so that with that, Jed, I guess what I want to know from you is, for families of students with learning differences, what do you think in this junior year is the hardest part for the students that you've worked with?
So for the students I've worked with over the years who are making this transition to junior year, which really is going to be the most college-like courses they've seen, a lot of, some kids are doing dual enrollment, a lot of APs, IBs. They're starting to face, a much higher level of work, different expectations, different challenges. Now they're in calculus. They're not, so they're taking more advanced classes and trying to navigate, trying to balance that. I was working with a student yesterday who is, struggling somewhat with this new level of rigor and trying to get him new strategies when he's, didn't put enough time in, and then suddenly he has a 72 on his first test. Like, okay, let's track back. What are our strategies? How much prep do you need? And so my experience of the junior year, it's just, throughout high school, this is obviously a very critical year. Everyone is aware of that. And trying to balance, can I use, the accommodations I have, if I have them, with my learning difference? Can I rise to the occasion. Can I get the help I need?
Mhm.
Which is really good practice for college. Help from, like, have you talked to the teacher? Have you, this, what you did last time, it didn't work so well. We have to pivot, adjust, change strategies. So it's having the student be able to really be reflective. And if what they're doing isn't working, how do I call an audible? How do I course correct? How do I change real time? Which those are skills they're going to need, in a major way once they're in college, because different professors, they're going to have to bring a different skill set, different level of, follow through, being organized on top of things, having everything laid out in front of them, and also making that transition to much more planning, much more. You have to have more strategy when you have these bigger assignments, more complicated tests, and what may have worked as a sophomore or a freshman may not work as well once you're in an AP class or an A push. My student is struggling with A push, and there's simply a different level than there was last year. So I think that really is, adjusting to the more elevated, that set of expectations, and making those shifts and getting the help they need.
Absolutely. And it's that new level of just a lot more work, right? That
Yeah.
makes this a lot harder. Elizabeth, I'm going to turn to you a little bit with your expertise and ask you. I think one of the things we find is so confusing to parents is they have their accommodations in high school, but what might that look like in college? And what should parents know about self-advocacy as a part of that transition? That's a huge question. I understand.
Well,
It could be a whole webinar, but there you go.
and also, I just want to say, like, I love everything that Jed just said about self-advocacy, about strategizing, about increased demands, because we're just talking about junior year, but then there's certainly a transition to college and increased demands and expectations. So this is all really good training for all of that. So, what families should know about accommodations is, certainly that your students are in charge of the process for registering for them. So, the high school special ed case manager is not going to contact Hamblet University, where your kid is going, and get her all registered. Your student will have to find that process online, complete our process. For the parents saying to themselves, can you do it themselves? I'm sorry, can parents do it themselves? This is not legal or medical advice, and it's important for me to say that, but generally, no, your students are adults in the eyes of the law after age, whether they're 18 or not. If they are fully enrolled at college, they are considered adults. So with that, it's important to know that the accommodations may or may not be what your student has received in the past. So just because your student had certain accommodations in high school doesn't mean the college has to provide the same ones. They get to decide what accommodations your students are eligible for. Some of the ones that your students have had in high school may not be appropriate or reasonable at the college level. And there are not a lot of forms of the kind of human support that students may have had in the past. We don't have, teacher assistants or paraprofessionals that walk around classes and prompt students and remind them to put their stuff away. We don't have personal aides unless the family provides one. So there's a lot we don't have time for today. But as far as the self-advocacy piece, your student, when they register with us, is probably going to have to say what their disability is. And they're probably going to have to say what accommodations they've had in the past, and what ones they want. And so it's important as your student moves through high school that they participate in some form of educating themselves. The most commonly suggested way to do that is for students to lead their own IEP. And I don't think that that's the only way. It's a good way. But meeting with the case manager, reviewing their documentation, talking to somebody about what's been done for them and why is really important. And also in this process, as they move through high school, going, it's a commonly used image of the parent, becoming the coach. And instead of emailing the teachers when the student is having a challenge, helping the student compose an email, understanding, what's an appropriate amount of time to wait, finding out if their teacher's going to be available after school the day they want to come for assistance, because people have lives. And so there are a lot of things that parents can be doing while their students in high school that will build the independence that they need for college.
Fantastic. Thank you. You know, it makes me think about one of the things that is often helpful with students that parents could easily do is I'm always surprised how many students can't articulate whatever their learning difference is,
Mhm.
right? And so actually practicing that with them, I often do that with my students. Okay, now can you explain it to me? Because they're going to have to be able to explain it. And so I think what you
Right.
said is so important because they're now the drivers of their learning, right? And so that I think is an incredibly important thing and often surprises students because sometimes they really aren't as privy to that knowledge. So they need
Mhm.
to understand that learning difference and they need to be able to articulate it so that they feel empowered to go into those meetings and feel confident as they self advocate.
And I want to be clear, you guys are using the word difference and I'm using the word disability. And it's a really important word at the college level because students are afforded protections through Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act. But it has to be a disability to be covered. And so I know that sometimes the professionals working with students use the word difference to be a more positive word, and I am all for positivity, sorry. And I think it's always important that these conversations start with focusing on student strengths, but we also need to be, transparent with them about their disability. And I occasionally in my professional community, I see college disability services directors saying that a student has submitted their documentation, or maybe the parent has sent it after the student has initiated the process, and the parent has emailed disability services to say, please don't tell my student that they have autism. We've never told them.
Right. And we see that in our practice a lot too, of like, don't disclose, but that won't work because the student is actually going to have to be their own best self advocate. Right. And so that's really not the best long term strategy. So, yeah.
Then there's also discussion in my community about how, and there's a great podcast episode on this too, Emily Kircher Morris, about how students then feel when something's been kept from them,
Right.
and worrying it may be bigger in their head than it actually is. So with that, I'll stop talking.
Knowledge is power, right?
Right.
Okay, Drew, I think this is usually when I start working with students and families. One of the biggest questions they have is, can you explain to me the process of getting testing accommodations? I think this is usually oftentimes the number one concern. So can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I can walk us through that at a high level.
Great.
So as you mentioned, Lisa, the question we get all the time is, okay, my students are on an IEP or on a 504. To Elizabeth's point, there is a documented disability on file. The most common accommodation that our students are typically applying for is extended time. There are other accommodations that students can apply for and get for these tests. But the two major tests we're looking at are either usually generally it comes up initially around the SAT and or the ACT. And yes, students can absolutely get those accommodations that they're using in school on these tests, but there is a formal process that you need to go through in order to get these accommodations approved. So generally speaking, you will work closely with your school. There's usually a school counselor or someone in the guidance office or college counseling office who is the point person for helping students get these accommodations from these organizations. And for both organizations, keep in mind, they are separate tests and they are separate companies. So if your student has accommodations for the PSAT, for instance, they automatically have those same accommodations for the SAT. They also have those accommodations for any AP exams that they have because it's all run by the college board, but they do not have it for the ACT. The ACT is a separate test. It is a separate organization. They each have their own processes. But what these organizations are looking for, it's pretty much two criteria at a high level that they want to see. So one is a documented learning disability. Often this is presented either through a 504 or an IEP, that there's also some kind of neuropsych evaluation or some kind of medical evaluation behind that. So you can actually document that your student has this disability. And then the second thing that they're looking for is the student actually using the accommodations that you are requesting in school? And generally speaking, if you can check both those boxes, both organizations are going to kind of follow the school's lead on this and will grant those accommodations for those tests. Just note, you can appeal it if for whatever reason your initial request is denied. You can appeal that, but just note, if you appeal the decision, you can't just go back to the organizations and be like, I totally disagree that you did not grant this to us. Can you please go back and look at it again and grant it on a second time? They're looking for further documentation. And in that, it might be a letter from a teacher. It might be more recent neuropsych evaluation testing that you've had done. It can even be a letter of support from the family. If they're working with a tutor, sometimes we've written letters to be like, look, I've worked with this student for 6 months. There's no way that they can hit their full potential on this without that extended time. They absolutely need it, but there is additional documentation that you need to submit. But you'll work closely with your school. Your school will help kind of gather all the documentation that you need. And then also just note, it is not up to the guidance team at your school to grant these accommodations. They will help you and support you, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the folk at the College Board for the PSAT and SAT and AP exams, and the ACT folk who are ultimately going to grant those accommodations. Jed, anything to add here? Kind of around this process?
No, I think you nailed it. It really is. You're working with the schools. The alternatives is some kids are homeschooled, in which case then you have the psychologist, the nurse, like that becomes much more of a big thing when they're working with the family directly. But that's unusual. Typically,
and also it does take some time. So, just to gather all the documentation, let the school know, make sure they have what they need when they're submitting your application. So you do want to give yourself a little bit of, upfront time to be able to submit that application. Generally, we're trying to target like 2 or 3 months before that sort of first test that you're asking for those accommodations. Again, just to take some of the stress away from it. But I will say both organizations, they have kind of changed their philosophies around granting these accommodations. They are much more willing now to kind of take the school's lead. But having said that, the school has to have those documentation on file. You can't just go to your guidance counselor and be like, hey, can you please advocate for me and get, these accommodations for me? They need to have the paperwork that they need on file in order to kind of drive you through that process.
And one thing I'm going to throw out there with the College Board, once you get the SSD number, the approval for one test, so that's why you always want to go for the PSAT first in 10th grade. And then that applies for all your AP exams. It applies to everything. Whereas the ACT, you're applying for one test date. And ideally, you want to apply early. And so if you plan to use that, apply for an earlier ACT, get the accommodation approval, and then that'll push forward. So but the name of the game is early is always better for this.
Absolutely, because it gets stressful. And of course, some of you are at private schools, some of you are big public schools where getting to your, counseling staff is a little more challenging. So do allow plenty of time and try to find that person in your school that's going to be supportive, because that's really, really important. Okay, thanks, you guys. That was fantastic. Elizabeth, we're going to go back a little bit and talk a little bit more about executive functioning, because I think this is such a huge part, self-advocacy. What do you think that students should have in place when they head off to college? What kind of self-advocacy and executive functioning skills should we be aiming for our college-bound students?
So first of all, we've already covered some good ones, like the ability to ask for help, and also, think about the process of asking for help. How do you write an email, right? How do you find the support sources online? And really, and it was just having a discussion. I was just in a workshop for the office where I work today on getting the semester started off right. And one of the things that we talk to students about is going through the syllabus and getting all of the exam and paper dates down on the calendar now. And so, these are things that schools don't always explicitly teach students to do. And so these are good habits that parents can help students establish, because obviously every single teenager is going to be very receptive to their parents suggesting that they sit down with them and go through this. I mean, it'll be just easy like that, no big deal. But if they're not willing to do it with you, if there's a source at school, somebody who can do this with them, that kind of thing. So it's all that forward thinking, right? One of the accommodations that students often have in high school and don't get at college, and this was seen in this large representational study done a bunch of years ago, 72% of those students got extended deadlines, or however you want to do it, for extensions for work, and 6% got it at college. So that shows you how much that approval rate falls off the cliff. So time management. And there are some really interesting tools that you can find. It's for some reason hosted on universities' library websites. But if you just do a search for university library assignment calculator, assignment planner, there are these tools where the student plugs in when they're going to start the paper, when it's due, and it provides them this great breakdown. And then it's their job to put those dates in the calendar and to meet them. And so talking to students about, okay, it's Friday, can you talk to me about what you're going to do this weekend and what times of this weekend you're going to carve out to do work. So you're not telling them when to do work, but you're getting them started thinking about it. Because the problem with college is there's all that unstructured time, which is what weekends are for students who aren't in, athletics or other kinds of extracurriculars. So the time management piece, people talk about this all the time, the waking up for school. Buy 4 alarm clocks if you need to. And the self-management as far as getting rid of distractions, enforcing with your students, putting the phone in the kitchen while they're doing their homework, taking the phone at night. They will probably not appreciate it, but it may be a habit that they decide to go back to in college if they find that, things are struggling. So, sort of making them do the things that we know are good for them, and hopefully they will, take it on. If you have that kid with a backpack that's always a disaster, I am not a fan of perfectionism, but 3 times a week after dinner, that's the time we empty the backpack and go through it and organize it. So trying to teach them, sustainable level of skill that will, basically keep them out of a lot of frustration, but not set the bar so high. Because I do see this problem with perfectionism in a lot of my students, that like if they can't do it exactly as they think they're supposed to, and that supposed to is pretty, troubling also, then they don't do it at all.
Thank you. You got Jenna or Jed, y'all want to add anything to that? I know you both have experience there.
Just nodding furiously.
Right? I know.
Yes. Cosine, everything.
Yes, exclamation point, right?
Elizabeth, do you have, and I'll throw this to Jed and Jenna too, do you have advice in terms of helping kids with that transition from like just totally a very structured day in high school where they wake up, they catch the bus, they have their schedule kind of lined out for them, they know when lunch is, they get home, they know they have an hour, then they have an extracurricular activity, right? And then suddenly you go to that college where maybe you have one class on Thursday, and that's it, and there's no other kind of built-in accountability there. So just kind of how we kind of think about or working with our students to kind of get them in that, to be able to kind of handle that transition a little bit.
Jenna, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I would say, and apologies for my cold, it's back to school season. So, yeah, I would say creating that structure for yourself. Like if it isn't on your calendar, it's not going to happen. So it might feel weird to be like, I'm going to schedule going to the gym because I know that's important for my mental health. But if it doesn't go on the calendar, then you're going to go, oops, well, actually, now that I'm really thinking about it, I don't have time to get there, work out, shower, come back, get my stuff for class, get to class. So really like looking at the calendar, and just because those hours are empty doesn't mean that they're empty for you. So sort of the same feeling as if you're someone with ADHD, creating a lot of mini deadlines for yourself can be really helpful, because if you really like working right up until the deadline and getting that rush of adrenaline when it's like right there, so create yourself a lot of mini deadlines. So you can do the same thing with, okay, I have one class on Thursday, but because I'm a freshman, I have classes on Friday. So that means that I actually need to think about, what do I need to be preparing for class on Friday? I'm going to block that out on my schedule so I can still do fun things. You just don't want to realize, oh, I actually can't go to that fun house party Thursday night because I forgot to do my stuff during the day. So building that structure in for yourself so you've got time to be spontaneous.
Yeah, I like doing some very explicit modeling with the kids when they first get to college, and we'll actually walk through like a series of days or a week. And, again, lots of inquiry and questions. They're the ones thinking through, even in terms of like where they're going to study, in their room, downstairs in their dorm, or it's a 20-minute ride to the bus to campus or Michigan, whatever it is. I'm going to study over here, but then I'm going to stay on campus for 3 hours. And we talk about, when are you going to eat, and when are you going to, play basketball, exercise, talk to your friends, and it actually, like, how long will things take you, and when can you do them? And so we start asking questions, and they begin filling out, that first week or so. And so then after we do some modeling, then of course we withdraw the scaffold, we back up. But even that exercise of walking through where you're going to be, how long things take, when do you need time to rest? Are you best in the mornings, the afternoons? All these questions, it gets them thinking about structure and form, because it's, this unbounded time, which is amazing, but we have to impose some level of structure, but still allow, the party on Thursday, some level of flexibility and freedom in there. But I think for a lot of kids who may be struggling with attentional challenges, having something structured in can be very, like, to anchor their day and their week, I think is very powerful, very helpful.
So I just want to show, and I've tried, I realized the chat doesn't work. I forgot what kind of meeting we were in. But this is available for free on my website. So if you go to the student tools site, if you go to free resources and pull down a tools, this is the time management thing. So you can do this with your high school students. So can you guys see this blow up here?
Yep.
So this is where we start. And we do this on paper, or this is an editable PDF. Because Google and iCal, you can't see the whole week all at once. And so just for this exercise, I really like to do this way. I co-sign everything that Jenna and Jed said. And what we do is we basically create a weekly routine. That's what's missing at college, right? It's all that unstructured time. And so it basically becomes a schedule. So this is when this student's classes met. And then we block off real life, like this student's going to sleep until it's time to go to class, right? And then, both, all sorts of students have a very long morning routine. They need to know that if you want an hour in the morning, you need to schedule that hour. So we block that off. This student wanted a goal of getting to the gym twice a week. We talked about, when would it make sense for you, right? When are you going to be most likely to go? Setting them up for success and trying to do this in a way that will work with their natural preferences. They were trying to go to game club. And then what we do is, everywhere you see the word study, that's a 2-hour block to prepare for that class. And so it becomes the routine. They know they're going to leave lunch and go to the library, to Jenna's, I think it was Jenna who said, or Jed, like, I'm sorry, where you're going to go. It's not just what you're going to do, but where you're going to do. Are you going to stay on campus because all the other freshmen on your hall are going to be goofing around if you go back? So this is something, even if you just do it with your student because the week is really busy, for the weekends, and get them to really block out their time, the more conscious we make them of the time that's passing and how to start to break that down, and they can make choices about it. If they want to wait till Sunday night to do their work, they can. And then if it doesn't go well, then at the start of the next week, and you go, let's talk about our results. What are we doing next?
Great. And I think one of the, you might be wondering, we're talking about college, but what we're really talking about is this is where they're going. So
Okay.
what can you do right now to start putting in? I think one of the most things that can be the most helpful is to let your student practice these things now in high school. This is like learning anything else. You have to practice it. You don't always get it right. But I think this, doing these things now versus dropping them at college when we already know there may be some deficits, is really much better idea to start now. And Jenna, you used this when we were originally talking, and I just loved this term so much. You said so that students in high school need to experience some productive failure. And I just was like, yes. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So this is one of my favorite concepts that I think for whatever reason is very scary to a lot of people. So the idea that failure is helpful, failure is the best way to learn. And by productive failure, I mean, like, it's not just, oh, I failed, now I'm an awful person and I'm going to beat up on myself about that, and because that's not productive. You know, like if a student of mine, let's say we're working on test prep and they call themselves stupid, I usually say like, I don't find that word helpful, because you can't really do anything with stupid. Careless, yes, right? We can fix careless. So, you know, even just reframing that. But if you're talking about failure, productive failure is saying, okay, I studied for that test and that test did not go well. So, okay, first off, the positives. I actually studied for it. Like, yay me. I didn't go like, it'll be fine, right? Like, I did actually try, and I reviewed my notes and I went in and I did my best. And okay, so it wasn't good enough. So now I get to think about, okay, so what was it? I just read my notes. Is there anything else I could be doing to be more active in the way that I studied? Did I ask for help? Right? I think it was maybe Elizabeth who was saying like one of the best way, or Jed possibly, is saying like one of the best things that you can do is know when to ask for help. So, you know, maybe that means, oh, I'm gonna talk to my teacher and say like, hey, why, I still don't understand why I got a point taken off of this short answer. Like, what was I missing? Talk to the teacher, figure out what's going on there. You know, like, use this as a, okay, I am going to do something different and see what happens with that different result. What I see sometimes that just really breaks my heart is when parents are afraid of letting their kid fail, because everything feels so high stakes, right? Like, I can't let my kid fail when they're in elementary school, because then they're not going to get tracked into the good math class in middle school. So I need to like really take a hand in their homework and maybe like tell them what the answer is. And then when I'm in middle school, well, I can't let my kid fail because I want to make sure that they qualify for APs. Well, I can't let my kid fail in high school because college. And then I can't let my kid fail in college because then they're going to flunk out and we spent all this money and now they're in debt. So you have to find places for failure to be safe, because otherwise they're going to fail when it is not safe and the stakes are really, really high. So you want to find, like, easy for me to say, right? Like, my kid's not even in grade school yet, but if they fail a test, they fail a test. It is actually not the end of the world. And then we can go, okay, what happened? Well, I thought that I was going to study for like an hour for this test, and I did, but like I only got through half the material. Great. What have we learned? Maybe next time we study for 2 hours. Let's try that. Let's see what happens. It also, failure develops grit, which is important not just for academics, but also for your emotional health as an adult. There is nothing like failing and realizing that you survived to make sure that you are going to be amazing at whatever happens, because failure does happen. It is a fact of life. We cannot protect our kids from it. And I'll step down off my soapbox now, but I think we do our kids, our students, a disservice if we try to protect them from that, because then when it does happen, they are going to be completely bowled over. And you want them to be upset about failure when they're in middle school and they're in high school. You don't want them to be crushed when they're 35.
And if you have not read The Gift of Failure by Jessica Lahey, go get a copy. I'm sure your library has it. It is everything that Jenna said is in there. And I just want to jump in because I know that sometimes in this audience of parents of students with disabilities, we have folks whose student got identified only after a number of failures. And so they're concerned about their students' self-esteem, but the point still matters here. It's even so, because everybody needs to have a realistic sense of what the student can do. And so, you know, we don't have time tonight for me to talk about all the many accommodations and supports that high schools provide that colleges don't. But some things you should be aware of are, you know, if the student is getting their work modified in high school, they're taking different tests, or they're getting fewer choices on the multiple choice, or they get to retake tests for a better grade. These are all things that I see in my community. It's not setting them up well for college. It's going to be a big, big change for them. And so if you are doing this, as always, out of love and wanting to support your student and maximize their potential outcomes, I think you do need to really think about how well that is going to set them up for college when those things are very likely. And the rate of modified assignments and tests, I think, was like 3% in that national study. So think about what's really a good match for your student. Classes should be a good match for them. They should always be a little challenge. That's what education is for. But if they are only making it through a class because they have gotten so many supports driven by adults and also changes to the expectations, that's something to really think about now, junior year.
I want to jump in on that one because I've seen this before. You know, I think junior year really is this time for parents to withdraw the scaffolds that have been in place for a long time. Even talking to friends of mine, like my daughter is sleeping through her alarm in the morning. Should I intercede? Like, actually, I think now is the time to not and help her buy the alarm. But you waking her up in the morning, because again, she'll be in college in, you know, a year and a half, 2 years, and she might miss the final. I want her to learn this lesson now, get the failure now, the productive get the lesson. And also, you know, the adult-driven accommodations, that's key. I think right now as juniors, if you have your kids are juniors, if a student needs more support now, the kid has to be driving it. As a junior, the parents need to be backing way off this, because I've seen this so many times, kids in college having to have the courage and the self-confidence and to go and ask for the help they need. They're not going to get the accommodation officially through, you know, the disabilities office. But I've had students of mine who couldn't understand the TA, who had a very strong accent. And can I go and actually get written notes? But you have to be able to go and ask. And so the kids practicing when they're juniors to go and ask for help they need. I've had kids with autism, other disabilities that need different supports, and you have to be able to go to office hours and ask for what you need. So again, this is a muscle which you build, and if parents are doing it, then it's not building. So I think junior year, again, the safe, productive failure. By the time they go off to college, they've built the muscle. They can talk to a teacher and ask for help they need from that teacher directly. To me, this is where the training wheels come off and the kids have to actually go and learn how to have this conversation for how to advocate. That to me is critical right now.
And I think
Also
it goes.
make sure if you have accommodations from your teachers that those are documented. So I had one student who commented to me about halfway through some test prep we were working on. Oh yeah, you know, my teachers always let me finish my tests during lunch. I just wish I had a little extra time. And I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense for all the slow processing I've seen. But now you're a senior in high school and you've never had to get a neuropsych test because your teachers are just giving you the accommodation. So there's no paperwork. There's, you know, it was not great. So, you know, if you need those accommodations, that's fine. Just make sure that you've got the paperwork to back them up.
And I would just add that if you have a student who, you know, and everybody's on a different trajectory. And so if senior year, your student still needs those adult-driven accommodations and supports and modifications just to not be miserable every day of school, then perhaps the next step after high school is not immediate transition.
Yeah.
And so, you know, like we don't want to push kids off the cliff in high school just to see, but I think if you find that it's necessary, you need to readjust your thinking about what will happen. And not going to college straight after high school doesn't mean they never go to college if that's their goal.
Right, and depending on what disability your student has, for some students, learning to manage living independently and managing all your academics is a huge executive functioning. So one of the things I often say to families when we start to see that is, okay, we're going to make a multi-year plan here, right? And we're going to learn how to live on our own and maybe do some kind of gap year or something. And then now that we have those skills in hand and they're not so difficult, go to this next step. That's not failure. But I think kind of the point that Elizabeth is making, if that continues, because we're talking about a vast array of students here and a vast array of disabilities. So we also want to be sensitive to that. And there are students where a multi-prong approach to the next step after high school can be a good, but if we never practice the failure, one of the hardest things on students emotionally is going to college and failing out. I mean, if there are students that I have worked with that have been truly, their self-esteem is taken all the way down, it's that. And usually they were only one ability to self-advocate away from success. Do you know, this was not hit by a train. It just 1,000 little cuts where they didn't have those self-advocacy skills. So I think that is really important as you're planning, that if we don't take a little bit and see what they can do, we could put them in a situation that is really hard on them and something that they then have to carry with them, for a long time. So we have to kind of test that out, as Jed said, and take some of this scaffolding off safely and see what happens, I think is really important. Yeah. Thanks, you guys. This is such a great conversation. One of the things that we did want to address, because it's another one of those questions that comes up a lot in conversations like this, because many of you as students in your junior year are thinking ahead to college applications, is should I disclose my disability in my college application? And this is something that I have worked with a lot. And so there's not a perfect answer to this question, like most questions. But what I would say is if your student had a late diagnosis and then let's say they got diagnosed in 10th grade, and then we see a nice upward trajectory, that's probably a time we would disclose. Or if a student has had this diagnosis for a while, but maybe you got them a great executive functioning coach and they started putting strategies into place and they built that toolkit to learn how to manage their learning and their grades went up, that's another time a student might disclose. The times when we typically don't recommend disclosing is if things are just bumpy the whole time. There's usually not a lot of advantage to disclosing, but I know people are typically worried about disclosing. And if there is a reason, like I have a good upward trajectory, and I have literally had this conversation with probably 100 college admissions reps, and they all, if a student can learn these tools, and then they can discuss that like in additional information on their application, they're a step ahead of their peers, even the peers that don't have a disability oftentimes. So I think we tend to see that being a positive if they've done this practice, learned how to develop tools and strategies. That's something you want to share because that is a step towards college readiness that, a lot of students don't have. So certainly, and the other piece is from time to time, I will have a student who says, no, I just don't want to disclose. I don't feel comfortable. It should be student led because it's their application. So sometimes for whatever reason, a student doesn't want to, it's again their application. Sometimes they want to disclose when I'm like, I don't know if that's going to help us, but they really want to. I'll tell them my opinion, but again, it's their application. But a lot of these students will just developmentally, they will start to do better as time goes on. And so that you want to kind of own that in the application for sure. Yeah. Okay, we've got one last question for you, Elizabeth, and that is, what kind of research should families be doing on the disability offices when they're considering colleges? Like, how would you go about doing that?
So, look, there are lots of different ways to approach this, but when I wrote the book, I talked to my disability services director friends. They were all pretty consistent about saying that the search should start with all the stuff that anybody's college search should start with.
Yep.
And the reason is, if you go to Arizona, if your student goes to University of Arizona, because you heard about this great SALT program that they have, which is, you know, kind of the granddaddy of all of these, it's a fee-based program. And they don't like big rah-rah schools, it's not going to be a good experience for them. So I would not suggest leading with supports, but rather finding a school that's going to be a good match, because while accommodations are important, they're really only part of any student's experience. But if your student knows they want to go to a school that has an extra support program or a very specific kind of autism program, or where there's a disability cultural center, because that makes them feel really validated, and they feel like it expresses something to them about the school's culture, that's fine. Although I will say, if I can be political for a moment, I don't know whether those disability cultural centers they're probably vulnerable at any given point as we move forward. So I would not pin it on that particular thing. But just so you know, every college in the country that accepts federal funds has to do at least some basic accommodations. And really, even the schools that you read about my friend jokes that certain colleges are actually hedge funds with an educational institution, institution attached to them. You know, they still take federal funds because they take Pell Grants for students with financial needs. They take GI Bill money. And we've certainly all been reading in the news about research grants, federal research grants. So they have to at least provide basic accommodations. So certain basic things. And Rutgers University in New Jersey, their disability services site has a great page of accommodations that you can look at. You can certainly read my book for a discussion not only about what is approved, but often what isn't considered an accommodation, and importantly, and why. But they have a great list you can look at for free and just to start to familiarize yourselves with this kind of things. So extended time for in-class exams, permission to record lectures, all that is also getting tricky right now. You know, and I'm focused on learning accommodations because that's my area, but students with medical equipment that they need may get a double-sized room at a double-sized room without a roommate to make way for their equipment, but not get charged for a single room rate. Dining halls are all now, you know, prepared for students who have serious problems that need certain kinds of nutritional accommodations. They're already set up for that. So I think it's a great idea to start to think about what your student would be looking for. And if once you've looked at the colleges, and on my website, there is a video I did where I went through a college's disability services site to kind of poke around, but also look at the other sources of support. So, you know, we're not going to do at our office the writing stuff. Is there a writing center? Is there a tutoring center? If there's a counseling center, what kind, you know, how often can a student see somebody and how long before they get referred out? So take into account everything, not just the disability services office. But, you know, if it matters to your student, and that's back to the self-determination that Lisa was talking about, when we talk about them deciding whether or not they're going to disclose their disability, that's self-determination, right? And if they don't really want to interact with the disability services office, then the office doesn't really matter, right? So, but if they're interested and they want to find out if somebody there will meet with them once a week, those are the kinds of questions you can ask. So this is a great opportunity to teach them how to email an office and say, I'd really like to meet with somebody. You know, can somebody make time? If you're going to campus, do not expect to drop in and just get a half-hour meeting. Some of these people are one-person offices serving literally hundreds of students. So don't take it as a bad sign if they can't drop everything to meet with you. It's a good sign because they're trying to serve the students that they have. And be aware that a lot of colleges are not set up, although some of my colleagues will do this, to review your students' documentation and tell you what they would get if they came. Most of us don't have that kind of staffing. Now, once your student is accepted, some of them still won't be able to do it unless they enroll. So, but these are all questions that you can ask.
And I just want to piggyback on what Elizabeth said, because, I used to teach a course to consultants who wanted to work with students with learning disabilities. And one of the things that I think is so important to remember is you do want to lead with your students' interests and talents and how they learn. And while the disability office is important, it's not the very first thing that I would talk about when I was talking about college, because I think one of the things we want to do is find a place that lights the student up. And my experience is that many of my students do better in college than they did in high school, because they can actually focus on something they're actually interested in. And with many of the disabilities, that helps things a lot. So stay there and we never want to make a student become a disability. And I think sometimes when college comes up, that happens. And I think we're selling the student short at that point, because we want the student, again, as part of that self-determination. What is it that they're interested in? What kind of place are they hoping for? All those things, because that's what makes this exciting for them, right? And so certainly we want to make sure that they have the adequate support they need. That's going to be important. But those two things really work together. And I am a huge fan of leading with the students' interests, aptitudes, all those things before we start on the disability piece.
Yeah. And so they don't identify with that disability, like the whole strengths focus, which we've mentioned,
Exactly.
Elizabeth. I mean, and even looking at someone's IEP or looking at someone's psych eval, and like, oh, I'm actually relatively better in this area, reading or this. So it's a strengths focus. One of my students, again, he was having a hard time with history, but he was like, I'm actually better than average at math. I'm like, okay, and it's reinforcing that. So you have a skill here, and so they don't just tied to their deficit. And so they acknowledge it, they're aware of it, but also the strengths, their interest. But I really call attention and call out and name the strengths, and that to me is critical for their self-concept and identity. So it's not so much tied to this label.
Absolutely. And I think it's very motivating. That's my experience working with students. When they have a goal that's something that actually jazzes them, they're a lot more excited to jump in. And so I think that's an opportunity that we don't want to miss. Okay, you guys, we have we got like 6 minutes. So we're going to do this like they do on those talk shows. And that is just a quick, one sentence. What, for students preparing for this during this junior year, what's the one piece of advice you'd give?
I'll throw something in.
Okay, go. Throw one in.
For sure. The one piece of advice is less is more. Don't overschedule, don't overcommit, don't overburden yourself. Make as much space as you can to optimize and have relatively a calm, peaceful year. If you stack it, overwhelm it, you're making stress for yourself. So leave as much space as you can for life and things to happen.
Great.
I've got it. Okay, so when you are planning how long something will take you, plan however long it is, and then add 15%.
I was going to say double it, but that showed you where I'm at.
I mean, if you're not sure, if you're genuinely like, I have no idea how long this will take, go with your gut and then double it. But I'd say for those of us who are chronically late, 15% will sometimes help you when you inevitably run into the traffic that you forgot to account for.
Let's see, I'll go with think of it as a journey, to piggyback on what Jenna said, right? Don't fear the failure, right? And also just know it's not going to be linear, right? It's not this linear progression from where you start and every single step is going to be, kind of up the mountain. Like kids fall down a little bit and it's totally fine, right? And then you pick yourself back up, you learn from it, and hopefully next time you get a little bit higher, and then you might slip a little bit again. So just it's not going to be just this kind of straight linear progression. So just be prepared for some failure, learn to try to embrace it a little bit, and if we can as Jenna so aptly put it, think of it as productive, right? What can we learn from this, as opposed to just thinking of it as like failure, failure, failure.
First of all, I'm going to cheat and say ditto to everything everybody said. But I do want to show you a resource. So let's see. Can I do this? I'm very bad at that. Oh,
It's
dear.
tricky.
All right.
With the
Yeah. Okay. So the truth about college admission, a family's guide, and this is the important subtitle, part of the subtitle, to getting in and staying together. There is a podcast by the same name by these authors. It's Brennan Barnard and Rick Clark. And so this is, really partially a college admission panel, but what they say that and repeat all the time, and I agree. And Ned Johnson, who also wrote The Self-Driven Child, another book you should read. Nothing's more important than your relationship with your child. And so, this is not easy. Parenting teenagers is not always a cakewalk. And don't let the pressures of what everybody is doing and how everybody's search is going encroach on your relationship with your child. We've made college into this, gigantic monster in so many ways. And our students feel it even when we are at home trying to say something different. They're getting it at school. I saw this, my kids are adults, but, they're going to be okay. Whatever they do after this, they're going to be okay. And so, the independence and self-determination and self-advocacy that we're talking about are important no matter what they do after high school, right? We want them to become fully realized adults who can take care of themselves, who know that they can take care of themselves and feel good about that. Their self-efficacy is so important. And so don't lose sight of that while we're worried about SAT accommodations and GPA and taking IB classes. Hold on to them.
Okay, we are getting close to our end here, and we have kind of taken it right up to for all of you who are here, we do have an exit poll. If you want to receive more information or have us connect with you, please do fill out our exit poll. And I'm going to see if we have any question. We had one question about a student who is in AP history where they're spending 15 to 20 hours a week reading and taking notes, and they're getting about 6 out of 10 right on the quizzes, and they're really trying hard despite distractibility. And the question is, what tips do you have? So again, we have about a minute and a half.
Highlighting is pretty much worthless.
Okay.
Just reading notes is pretty much worthless. You need errorful practice. If you aren't generating errors or mistakes, you're missing the feedback that's critical to actually know, do you know something or not? So you need forced retrieval practice where you aren't looking at the answers, you aren't looking at the notes, but you're seeing, do I actually know this content? So testing yourself is a way of reinforcing learning and knowledge. And if you aren't doing ample self-testing and you're just reading passively, any kind of passive study essentially is very low utility, almost worthless. So you need active, you need errorful study and learning. And if not, then your time is being pretty much wasted.
I recommend Cornell Notes. And I really like that because it builds in the chance to challenge yourself. It gives you like a little area to write your notes, an area to write down sort of keywords, and then you can, and it literally gives you lines to fold the paper over so you cannot see what you've written, and then you can quiz yourself. So you don't have to spend extra time creating something on Quizlet. So you're able to look at that. And it also kind of forces you to write bullet points. If you are like me, student, you are writing too many things in your notes. You are trying to write down every single word the teacher said, and that is just not useful. You want to be doing bullet points. You want to be synthesizing the information yourself. And you should not just be reviewing those notes the night before the test. You want to review that information every couple of days so that your brain knows, ooh, I guess this is important and I should hold on to it.
Thank you. Okay, there was one other question, which was someone asked, do you have to get new accommodations every time you take the ACT? And the answer is no.
Yes, no, it's you don't have to go through this process every single time, but essentially when you register, it will ask you, are you taking this test with accommodations? And you click yes there. And then you also just have to let the school know that you are registered for this test and you're registering it with those accommodations. So the school knows, and they can essentially, it's through their portal, they can let the ACT know, but you don't have to. Once you have accommodations for the ACT, you do have them going forward for every ACT test you're gonna take.
Fantastic. And I want to thank all of you for being with us tonight and our wonderful panel who have graciously shared their expertise. Thank you. And if there's ways that we can be helpful for your families, please let us know. And we hope you have a wonderful evening and best of luck on this journey. Thank you.